Finally, we need to talk about the kind of two great examples or two grand examples. I won't call them great. The two grand examples of pure, unadulterated fascism from Western Europe. So we'll start with Italy, which is the birthplace of fascism. So Italy is like I said, the birthplace of fascism after World War One. In Italy, after World War One, there is a lot of resentment of what's known as the Big Three: Great Britain, France, and the United States. Um, the Italian people and the Italian government see themselves as disrespected by the Big Three, especially when it comes to the Versailles Peace Treaty. They do not gain any of the promised colonial land or possessions that they thought they were going to get. They do not see any of the economic boom that, say, the United States sees, and they are not included in these massive war debts that Germany is forced to pay to Great Britain and France. So to them, they feel as even though they fought on the side of the Allied powers, that they are being treated as essentially one of the lesser powers, that they're being treated the same as, say, a Japan. Now, when you couple this resentment with the crisis of the Great Depression, the poverty, the homelessness, the joblessness fundamentally shakes people's faith in democratic capitalism. And this creates a power struggle in Italy with two main political parties at the head of it. One are the communists in Italy, the Communist Party, and the other is a party that was begun by a former Italian soldier and newspaper writer known as Benito Mussolini, and that's known as the Fascist Party. And Mussolini's fascists are dedicated to rebuilding Italian greatness, of reinvigorating the greatness of Rome, right? So, in order to gain power, Mussolini arranges violent demonstrations all around Italy to discredit um, the constitutional monarchy, basically making the government seem weak and ineffective, allowing Mussolini the opportunity to stand in and give speeches talking about how these things would never happen under him, and using his own kind of personal private army known as the Black Shirts to break up communist rallies and to intimidate his political opponent. Most of his speeches rally against the weak monarchy. He promises law and order. He promises an end to the depression. He's going to get people back to work. Kind of one of his most famous promises that Mussolini loved to make was that only he would have the power to make the trains run on time in Italy, which apparently was a pretty common problem in terms of Italian transportation. But again, regardless, you see the totalitarian aspect of Italian fascism. The idea that only the leader, only this singular figure can serve the people by bringing them back to prominence and greatness, right? And so Mussolini uses his fascist kind of personal army or police force known as the Black Shirts to remove any opposition violently. And he pressures the king of Italy and the monarchy to gradually hand over more and more power over the country to him, promising to rebuild this Italian empire. And all the while, he is promoting this kind of hyper nationalistic Italian cultural superiority, and most of it is linked back to the greatness of the Roman Empire millennia before. That under Mussolini, he's going to be able to restore Italy to the greatness that was Rome. right? And to demonstrate his power, he begins aggressive foreign expansion. He reinvades Ethiopia in Eastern Africa and actually conquers it, which is somewhat impressive because the Italian army had tried to colonize Ethiopia in the 1880s and had failed. So to the Italian people, Mussolini is seen as, you know, righting a wrong or fixing this kind of blemish on the greatness of Italian history, right? Now, here's the thing about Mussolini is for all of his effectiveness at implementing this fascist government, he is not strictly and completely totalitarian. Major Italian businesses and corporations, especially Italian automakers, are able to retain some independence and autonomy by negotiating with Mussolini. Another group that remains independent and autonomous is the Roman Catholic Church. Not even Mussolini and all of his fascist cronies and all of his fascist violence is able to break the ties between the Italian people and the Roman Catholic Church. And anytime he tries to rein in the Roman Catholic Church, he is met with very wide scale, public reaction and public violence. So and I believe it's 1928, he signs essentially an agreement with the Roman Catholic Church where he will allow them to remain autonomous and independent of the government as long as they don't speak out publicly against the fascist party, right? And so you can see a lot of this kind of Italian fascism in the propaganda of the day. Again, most of it tied to the greatness of the Roman Empire. On the left here, you see a modern Italian soldier being advised by this large, powerful Roman legionnaire, kind of passing the torch from the greatness of the Roman Empire to the modern Italian army. You also see in the middle here propaganda, basically um, calling on the people to defend Italy and its Italian roots and its an Italian greatness from foreign influences. On the top left, you have the Jews, and the top right, you have the Soviet Union and the communists, and the bottom right, you have the symbol of the Masons and the Illuminati. Again, on the far right here, again, more references to the greatness of Rome and the Roman legion with the SPQR symbol. Now, the granddaddy of them all, the penultimate in fascist totalitarian government is far and away Germany and the rise of the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party is founded by Adolf Hitler in the late 1920s. Now, Hitler fought in World War One and buys very strongly into German nationalism. And he believes that the only reason that Germany lost World War One is because they were betrayed by those behind the scenes, that the German army itself withstood everything that the British, the French, and the Americans and the Russians had to throw at them, and were still willing to fight in 1918, but the politicians and the people behind the scenes stabbed them in the back. And that was a phrase that he used over and over again in his speeches, right? So Hitler, over the 1920s and 1930s, begins to play on the anger and the fear of the German people over the Treaty of Versailles and how Germany is solely blamed for World War One by the Allied powers. And so Hitler promises to restore national pride by revenging Germany and tearing up the Treaty of Versailles, and he ignores its declarations at every opportunity that he gets. Now, he also, through the masterful use of propaganda, is able to tie the greatness of Germany, of the German state, to this idea that he has about racial superiority of what he calls the Volk, the people, right? And he promotes this idea that Germans are descended from this superior, what he calls Aryan race. And this Aryan race is made up of Germans and Northern Europeans, Scandinavians, that they all come from this kind of similar racial background, and that all of these people are the superior race, that they're the ones who have driven Western culture to its highest point, and that the German people are destined to continue and take that to the next level, right? And so he uses this nationalistic, ethnic, kind of superiority to appeal to the working and the middle class German people who are suffering the most from the Great Depression. And he uses this nationalistic racial approach to blame all of Germany's problems on a number of different groups. He blames the problems on the communists. He blames problems on the rich and the powerful, the aristocracy, saying that they're the ones that betrayed Germany and the German army and surrendered to the Allies. But most especially, he focuses on the Jews as the main source of the problems of the German people. He paints them as outsiders, as foreigners, as even as a different race in some cases, and he creates this massive propaganda machine within Germany that bombards the German people with constant radio and constant print and constant movies, and he creates this endless stream of anti-democratic, anti-Semitic, pro-German propaganda. And what he promises the German people, along with his ideas about racial purity, is this idea of what he calls Lebensraum, or living space, and that the German people, as this superior people and superior ethnicity, are entitled to more living space, and that they must go out and take it at the expense of the inferior peoples of the world, mainly the Jews and the Slavic peoples of Eastern Europe. Now, in the late 1920s and the early 1930s, as the Great Depression is at its height, the Nazi Party and this kind of message of restoring national pride and pointing the blame and pointing the finger at everybody but the German people begins to become very popular. The Nazi Party begins to win more seats in what's known as the Reichstag, or the German Congress, and Hitler intensifies this by using, similar to Mussolini, staged violence in order to consolidate his power. Early on in his political career, he tried to stage an uprising in a beer hall next to the Reichstag, where him and his fellow Nazis were going to enter the Reichstag building and declare martial law and arrest all of the German parliament. Now, it didn't work, and Hitler was arrested and thrown in jail for a number of years, but it encouraged him that staged violence and just violence in general could be used as a tool to gain more political power and to further his propaganda, right? So in 1933, a mysterious fire breaks out in the Reichstag building. And yeah, I say mysterious. A mysterious fire breaks out in the Reichstag building, and Hitler uses this incident as a tool to blame the German Communist Party and point at them as, causing chaos and anarchy And he is able to ride that wave of anti-communist sentiment into appointment as chancellor for life. Again, promising the people law and order, promising them a return to greatness, promising them Lebensraum and all of these other things that they're supposedly entitled to as the master race. Now, once Hitler is in power, he begins the change from a democratic republic to a totalitarian dictatorship. He slowly strips away individual freedoms, enhances the power of the Nazi Party. In order to pull Germany out of the Depression, he begins massively rebuilding the German military. He invests in massive infrastructure, which puts millions of people back to work and revives the German economy, which makes him even more beloved by the German people and gives him the political cachet to further erode individual freedoms. And then he begins using that power to expand German borders. And then he begins what's known as the final solution, which is this systematic elimination of people that Hitler and the Nazis see as inferior or undesirable, mainly Jews, but also people of mixed race, the mentally and physically handicapped, anyone who the Nazis see as potentially polluting the purity of German blood in the German gene pool, right? And again, this is stuff that you can see everywhere in Nazi propaganda, right? This idea of the perfect German, like, nuclear family, white, pure race, Northern European ethnicity, Northern European roots, right? The wholesomeness of what he calls the Aryan people, right? While at the same time pushing out a constant stream of anti-Jewish, anti-foreign propaganda, equating the Jews with foreigners, equating them with the British and the Americans, and especially the Soviet Union and the communists, basically saying that, Judaism is the enemy of the German people, that Jews are not part of us, that they are outsiders, and they're here simply to take our money and lead us into financial ruin,